He moved with the quiet grace of a ghost, his mop a silent extension of his will, wiping away the grime of the world, and with it, the memories of a life that once roared. Welcome back, truth seekers and connoisseurs of the unbelievable, to Tale of Wonder. If you haven't yet joined our growing family of story lovers, now's the moment to click that subscribe button and embark with us on another journey into the depths of human nature. In the sterile, echoing halls of the prestigious Sterling and Sons Financial Corporation, a man named Master Lee existed at the periphery. He wasn't a CEO, nor a high-flying stockbroker, nor even a middle manager. Master Lee was, to all appearances, merely the cleaner. He was the stooped figure in the worn, gray overalls, the man whose domain was the gleaming, reflective floors, the sanitized, white-tiled restrooms, the perpetually overflowing waste bins of the ambitious. He arrived before dawn, a silhouette against the city's nascent, bruised purple glow, and departed long after dusk, a shadow melting into the hazy yellow of the streetlights. His presence was so unassuming, so utterly, profoundly unremarkable, that most of the sharp-suited executives barely registered him. They existed in a world of frantic, high-decibel importance. He existed in a world of quiet, patient observation. They might nod vaguely if their eyes happened to cross his path, or offer a perfunctory, clipped mourning as they barged past him in a hallway, their minds already 1,000 miles away, grappling with market trends, hostile takeovers, and quarterly reports. To them, he was simply Lee, or the old cleaner, or more often, just a slight obstacle to be sidestepped. He was an indispensable but entirely invisible cog in the great, gleaming corporate machine. The building itself was a monument to this cultivated ignorance. Sterling and Sons occupied the top 20 floors of a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a structure of cold glass, polished steel, and unforgiving marble. The air inside hummed with the sound of unseen servers and the whisper of a climate control system that kept the temperature at a perpetual, unnerving chill. It smelled of expensive, neurotic coffee, faint, competing colognes, and the sharp, antiseptic tang of Lee's own industrial-grade cleaning fluids. Lee was the counterscent, the man who chemically erased the messy evidence of the human beings who worked there. Lee himself was a man of few words, his face a complex roadmap of wrinkles that hinted at a long, arduous journey. These weren't the soft wrinkles of a life of leisure. They were deep grooves etched by sun and wind, by concentration and discipline. His eyes, though, held a depth that utterly belied his humble station. They were ancient, perceptive eyes, often observing the frantic, almost comical dance of ambition and anxiety that played out daily within those glass walls. From his vantage point, pushing a cart of rattling bottles and folded rags, he saw everything. He saw the whispered conspiracies in hushed corners, the nervous twitches of those facing ruin, the triumphant, feral smiles of those who had just conquered. He saw the junior analyst weeping silently in a stairwell after being eviscerated by a superior. He saw the partner practicing his golf swing with a rolled-up report when he thought no one was looking. He saw it all, and he said nothing. His silence was not born of ignorance, nor of fear. It was born of a profound, unshakable wisdom, an understanding that all of this, the shouting, the victories, the panic, was just noise. It was the fleeting, chaotic froth on the surface of a very deep, very still ocean. The irony, of course, was colossal. It was an irony so rich and so deep that Lee himself sometimes had to hide a small smile behind his dust mask. For Master Lee was not merely a convenient moniker, a respectful way to address an elder. It was a title. It was a title earned not in a boardroom, but in sweat, in meditation, in the shattering of limits. It was forged in the crucible of a dedication so absolute it bordered on the spiritual. Before the mops and the buckets, before the anonymity of disinfectant fumes, Lee had been, in a very different world, a master of a rare and formidable internal martial art, a discipline that focused not on brute strength, but on the redirection of energy, on finding the weakness in an opponent's center, on using an attacker's own aggression against them. His movements, now confined to the rhythmic, circular swish of a wet mop or the careful, linear pushing of a vacuum, once flowed with a lethal poetic precision. Each gesture, from the way he'd lift a 50-pound trash bag, as if it were a pillow, to the way he'd spin his mop to wring it out, was a tiny, diluted echo of a form, a kata. His hands, now calloused and dry from industrial cleaning solutions, once possessed the power to shatter granite, not through impact, but through a focused transmission of chi. His mind, now focused on scheduling toilet roll refills and ordering more floor wax, had once been a steel trap, a place of absolute stillness, capable of anticipating and countering an opponent's move before they had even formed the thought to execute it. He had retired from that life, not out of defeat, but out of a profound, soul-deep weariness. He had reached the pinnacle of his art and found that the summit was a lonely, cold place. He had seen too much, fought too many battles, some for honor, some for necessity, and some, he regretted, for ego. He had witnessed too much unnecessary pain, inflicted and received. He sought obscurity. He sought peace. He sought a quiet corner of the world where he could simply exist, where his past could remain buried, a secret held tight and silent within his own weathered skin. The cleaning job, with its anonymity and its steady, mundane rhythm, was perfect. It was a form of active meditation. It demanded little of his mind, but engaged his body in simple, repetitive, restorative tasks. It offered a steady, unassuming income. And most importantly, it allowed him to be utterly, completely forgotten. He was no longer a master. He was just Lee. And in that, he had found a measure of contentment he hadn't known was possible. The employees of Sterling & Sons, particularly the younger, more boisterous types, often treated Lee with a casual indifference that, in its own way, was a form of disdain. They were the center of their own universes. He was a distant, unimportant satellite. They would leave their desks a mess, a graveyard of crumpled paper, styrofoam coffee cups half full of cold, bitter brew, and the sticky, discarded wrappers of their expensive lunches, knowing full well that the cleaner would deal with it. They saw him as a service, a utility, not a person with a lifetime of experiences, triumphs, and heartbreaks. Occasionally, one of them, usually emboldened by a few too many after-work drinks at the bar downstairs, might crack a condescending joke about his age or his supposed slowness as Lee patiently waited to clean the elevator they were holding. Lee would simply offer a faint, almost imperceptible smile, his eyes patient, and continue his work, his movements never faltering. Their words, like the dust motes dancing in the artificial light, were empty. They held no power over him. There was one individual, however, who stood out in his interactions with Lee, one who seemed to go out of his way to punctuate Lee's invisibility, a young, ambitious executive named Marcus Thorn. Marcus was everything Lee was not: loud, flamboyant, acutely, desperately aware of his own perceived importance. He was a rising star at Sterling & Sons, known for his aggressive deals and even more aggressive, almost theatrical, attitude. He wore suits that were just a little too tight, watches that were entirely too large and gold, and he walked the halls not with a stride, but with a strut, as if he were perpetually on stage. His voice was a piercing, confident bray that echoed from the conference rooms. Marcus often referred to Lee as Dusty or Mop Man, a habit that grated on some of the more sensitive employees, but one that Marcus seemed to revel in. It was a small, petty display of power. He would sometimes accidentally kick a waste bin over just as Lee was passing, scattering its contents, and then, with a theatrical sigh, say, "Oh, goodness. Mop Man, clean up on aisle 6, and laugh at his own wit." He would leave a particularly sticky spill, a glob of jam from his morning toast, a puddle of energy drink, on his desk, observing with a smirk as Lee meticulously, patiently, wordlessly cleaned it up. He saw Lee as an object of mild amusement, a harmless, frail old man whose sole purpose was to serve the corporate elite, to be the bottom rung on the ladder that he, Marcus, was so rapidly climbing. To Lee, Marcus was not an enemy. He was just unbalanced. Lee had seen men like him before, in the dojo and in the ring. Men who were all yang and no yin. All external aggression with no internal foundation. Their energy was chaotic, brittle. They were like a tree with too many branches and not enough roots. From a martial perspective, they were laughably, dangerously predictable. Lee would simply bow his head slightly, clean up the mess, and move on, his own internal energy as calm and undisturbed as a mountain lake. One crisp autumn morning, this carefully balanced, hierarchical world tilted on its axis. A new sense of unease, a scent different from coffee and cologne, settled over Sterling and Sons. It was the metallic tang of fear. Whispers rippled through the office, starting at the executive level and trickling down, growing louder with each passing hour. A series of high-value internal thefts had occurred. This wasn't just a missing laptop or a stolen wallet. This was surgical. Confidential documents, sensitive client data on encrypted USB drives, even a few expensive, very personal items from the CEO's own office had vanished from secure locations. Panic, a creature anathema to the financial world, began to set in. The company's reputation, its very foundation of client trust, was at stake. The police were called. Stern-faced detectives in ill-fitting suits swarmed the gleaming halls, their presence a jarring note of grim reality in this temple of abstract wealth. A thorough investigation was launched. Days turned into a week, and the week turned into two, with no real leads. Security footage showed nothing conclusive. The thieves, or thief, were meticulous, professional, leaving no trace. The employees, stripped of their bravado, became paranoid. They eyed each other with suspicion. They huddled in small, quiet groups, conversations stopping abruptly when anyone else approached. The once vibrant, arrogant atmosphere of the office was replaced by a palpable, suffocating tension. Lee, of course, was interviewed. A young, tired-looking detective had cornered him by his slop sink. "You're here all hours, old-timer," the detective had said, not unkindly, but with a weary condescension. "See anything? Anyone sticking around late? Acting weird?" Lee, wringing out a gray rag, had paused. He looked at the detective, his eyes clear and direct. "People here," he said, his voice soft, "are always acting weird. It is a strange place." The detective sighed, chalking it up to a language barrier or senility, and moved on, never once considering that the man in the gray overalls was the single most observant human being in the entire 24 radius. Lee, for his part, had indeed noticed things. While the police were looking at keycard logs and server room firewalls, Lee was observing the trash. He was a forensic observer of human refuse. He noticed, for instance, that Mr. Harrison in 14B, a senior director with a penchant for boasting, had suddenly started shredding all his documents, even his lunch receipts. He noticed that the waste bin near the fire escape on the 15th floor, usually empty, now contained a steady supply of cigarette butts, despite it being a non-smoking building. Someone was taking nervous, secret smoke breaks in the stairwell. He saw the subtle, almost invisible signs of anxiety that the executives, so adept at hiding their feelings from each other, could not hide from the man who cleaned their toilets and emptied their bins. Marcus Thorn, ever the opportunist, saw this chaos not as a crisis, but as his chance to shine. He loudly proclaimed his theories, pointed fingers at rivals, quietly to management, loudly to his subordinates, and even suggested a complex insider trading scheme that he claimed only someone with his unique insight could decipher. He was everywhere. He was offering unsolicited advice to the police, questioning colleagues with a theatrical, just-between-us tone, and generally making himself a magnificent nuisance. He was convinced he would be the one to crack the case, solidifying his position and earning a hefty bonus. He held court in the break room, a half-eaten Danish in hand, his voice booming. "Honestly," he scoffed, gesturing expansively, "it's obvious they're looking in the wrong places. These flat-footed cops, what do they know? They're looking for some Ocean's 11 crew. But I know this world. This is an inside job. Someone with access, someone with nerve. We need someone with real street smarts, someone who understands how these things actually work, not just some textbook detective." His eyes briefly flickered to Lee, who was quietly wiping down a nearby counter, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, hidden by his mask. Marcus barked a laugh. "Maybe it's Mop Man. The perfect cover." His sycophants laughed with him. Lee just continued to wipe the counter, his motions circular, patient, and perfect. During this period of heightened alert, Lee's routine changed, but so subtly that no one would ever notice. He simply listened more. He observed. His ancient eyes missed nothing. While others panicked and speculated wildly, Lee methodically went about his duties, his presence a strange, comforting, silent constant in the midst of the escalating chaos. One evening, very late, as the office was finally emptying out, a junior analyst, clearly distraught, approached Lee. He was by the elevators, replacing a flickering fluorescent bulb. The young woman, named Sarah, was pale, her hands visibly trembling. "Master Lee," she began, her voice a reedy whisper. She was one of the few who used his full, respectful moniker, something she'd picked up from a brief, polite conversation they'd had months ago about a small jade charm he wore on his card. Lee stopped his work, turning to her with his full, patient attention. The simple act of being truly seen seemed to unburden her. I think I saw something," she stammered, twisting a tissue in her hands. "Something that might be important." Lee just nodded, his stillness inviting her to continue. Sarah explained that she had accidentally stayed very late, working on a presentation, so late that she'd missed the last main elevator run. She'd taken the service stairs down and had cut through the 14th floor lobby to get to the fire escape. And she had witnessed one of the company's senior directors, Mr. Harrison, making an unscheduled, furtive visit to the secondary server room. It was a room that was typically off-limits to most employees after hours, even directors without specific IT clearance. She described his nervous demeanor, the way he kept looking over his shoulder, the way he clutched a small, unmarked black USB drive. He'd swiped his card, slipped inside, and emerged less than a minute later, empty-handed. He had then hurried away, almost bumping into her as she hid in an alcove, before rushing off without a word. Sarah had dismissed it at the time, thinking it was just a director pulling rank. But with the ongoing thefts, it now seemed suspicious. Lee listened patiently, his face unreadable. When she finished, he asked a few quiet, precise questions. "What time was this?" 10:17 p.m. "I know because I texted my roommate." "Did his shoes make a sound?" "What?" Yes, he was walking fast but softly, like he was trying not to make a sound." "Was the light on the card reader green or red before he swiped?" "It was green." "That's weird, isn't it? It should be red." Sarah was surprised by the clarity and focus of his inquiry. She had expected a vague nod, a dismissive grunt. Instead, she found herself confiding in him, a strange sense of calm washing over her in his presence. She then apologized profusely for bothering him with what might be nothing, and hurried home. Lee, however, knew it was not nothing. A green light on a security locked door meant it was already unlocked or bypassed. He had already observed Harrison's increasingly erratic behavior. He'd seen the man's trash change from confident reports and golf magazines to empty bottles of antacids and brochures for high-risk, last-chance investments. He had seen the desperation, and now Sarah had provided the how. The next day, Lee's routine changed again, ever so slightly. He spent a little more time cleaning the 14th floor, particularly the corridor housing Mr. Harrison's office and that secondary server room. He accidentally left his cleaning cart parked near the fire escape stairs, its bulk providing him with a strategic vantage point as he dusted the wall fixtures. He polished the same brass nameplate outside Harrison's office 3 separate times, listening to the strained, high-pitched phone call happening within. He observed the subtle, uncontrollable tension in Harrison's shoulders, the way his eyes darted to the security camera every time he passed it, the uncharacteristic, clammy sweat on his brow, even in the air-conditioned building. Lee was piecing together a puzzle, not with spreadsheets or security camera feeds, but with the ancient art of observation and an innate understanding of human psychology honed over decades of intense, high-stakes training and confrontation. The ultimate irony of the situation was that the police and the internal security team were focusing on sophisticated hacking methods, external breaches, or high-tech gadgetry. They were looking for a ghost in the machine. Lee, however, understood that the most dangerous threats often came from within, from the most mundane of sources, and from the most overlooked individuals. He also knew, from his own cleaner's knowledge, that the secondary server room on 14 was a backup, and its security protocols were reset manually by the night patrol at 10:30 p.m., after which there was a 3-minute window before the system rebooted. Harrison hadn't just been there late. He'd been there at a very specific, very vulnerable time that a few days later, a pivotal emergency board meeting was scheduled, meant to address the ongoing security crisis and to announce drastic, potentially devastating measures, including possible layoffs to cover the losses. The tension in the building was thick enough to cut with a knife. The air felt static, charged. Marcus Thorn, naturally, was in his element, holding court in the break room, loudly criticizing the police and the company's security efforts, even subtly implying that he knew more than he was letting on. He was positioning himself to be the hero, the savior, the one who saw it all coming. That afternoon, as the board meeting was in full swing in the 20th floor main conference room, a final catastrophic data breach was detected. This wasn't a quiet theft. This was a full-scale assault. Millions of client records, sensitive financial forecasts, and the company's entire book of proprietary trading algorithms were being siphoned out of the company's servers in real time. Panic erupted. Screens flashed red. Alarms, digital and audible, blared through the halls, and the IT department went into a complete shouting frenzy. The entire network was under attack, seemingly from within, and they were powerless to stop it. The board meeting disintegrated into pure chaos. The CEO, Mr. Sterling himself, a man in his late 60s who had built the company from nothing, looked utterly devastated, his face a ghastly shade of gray. The company was facing ruin. This was an extinction-level event. In the midst of the pandemonium, Marcus Thorn, for once, was silent, his bravado instantly evaporating, replaced by a pale-faced, slack-jawed horror. This was far beyond his capacity to spin or control. Suddenly, a calm, clear voice cut through the noise. It wasn't a shout, but it sliced through the panic like a hot knife through butter. The perpetrator is Mr. Harrison. All heads snapped towards the source. It was Lee. He wasn't at the doorway. He was in the server room. The main server room, adjacent to the boardroom, which was now flashing with red emergency lights. He stood there, his normally stooped posture somehow straighter, his presence suddenly filling the space. His eyes, fixed on the main terminal, burned with an uncharacteristic, cold intensity. He held a small, black, unmarked USB drive between his thumb and forefinger. A stunned, deafening hush fell over the room. Then, a wave of incredulous murmurs. The cleaner? What is he talking about? Who let him in here? Mr. Sterling, initially stunned, found his voice. Lee, what on earth are you doing? Get out of there. Mr. Harrison has been siphoning data for weeks. Lee stated, his voice devoid of emotion, each word precise. He used a backdoor program on this drive. He held it up, uploaded through the guest terminal in the secondary server room on 14. Time to activate when the main security protocols reset after the cleaning crew's daily rounds. I know, because I was waxing the floor outside when he did it 2 nights ago. He then explained, with chilling, simple precision, how Harrison had exploited the brief window of vulnerability, how he had used the chaos of the smaller, physical thefts as a smokescreen, and how he had meticulously planned this final, devastating strike. He detailed Harrison's nervous habits, his unusual movements, the cigarette butts in the stairwell, the antacids in his trash, the soft-soled shoes he'd taken to wearing to muffle his steps, all the things that Lee had observed from the shadows. This, he said, holding up the USB drive, is the kill switch. He just activated the final data transfer. He planted this one in the main server hub last night during the fire drill. I just unplugged it. Harrison, who had been attempting to slink out of the boardroom in the confusion, now froze, his face ashen, a mask of pure, cornered terror. He's mad. He's lying. He's just an old cleaner. What does he know? He's trying to frame me, he stammered, his voice cracking, hysterical. He knows enough, Lee replied, his eyes narrowing slightly, a flicker of something ancient, vast, and dangerous in their depths. He knows what desperation looks like, and he knows what to look for when others are too busy looking away. Just then, two police officers, who had been permanently stationed in the lobby and had been called to the scene of the massive data breach, rushed into the room, guns drawn, completely bewildered by the scene. They had been struggling to pinpoint the source of the attack, their sophisticated tools failing to keep up with Harrison's cunning. Lee calmly held the USB drive out to the lead officer. "This is the key, and the source." The officer, clearly bewildered, looked at Lee, then at the CEO, then back at the USB drive. "And how do you know this?" Before Lee could answer, Harrison made his move. It wasn't a lunge for the drive. It was a lunge for Lee. With a desperate, animalistic cry, he grabbed a heavy glass water pitcher from the boardroom table and swung it, aiming for Lee's head, a wild, crude, and utterly desperate attempt to silence his accuser. What happened next, no one could fully process. It was as if time itself bent. Marcus Thorn saw a frail old man about to be bludgeoned. Mr. Sterling saw his company's last hope about to be extinguished. The police officers saw an assault in progress and began to move. But Lee just was that he didn't dodge. He didn't block. As Harrison's arm came swinging, Lee pivoted on the ball of his left foot, a perfect practice motion that took him just inside the arc of the swing. The heavy pitcher sailed past his ear, close enough to ruffle his gray hair. In the same fluid, unbroken motion, Lee's right hand rose. It didn't strike. It simply met Harrison's descending wrist, his fingers lightly finding the specific pressure point, the shun man. His other hand came up, not to grab, but to gently guide Harrison's own momentum. He used the man's own violent, forward-lurching energy, his own unbalanced chi, against him. There was no sound of a punch. There was just a soft thud as Lee redirected Harrison's trajectory, twisting his arm behind his back with such practiced, economical ease that Harrison cried out, a high-pitched shriek of pain and surprise, before collapsing to his knees, his face slamming into the plush boardroom carpet. The glass pitcher rolled harmlessly away. The USB drive remained safely in the officer's hand, who hadn't even had time to flinch. The room erupted. But it wasn't noise. It was a collective, ragged gasp, a vacuum of sound, exclamations of pure, unadulterated shock, absolute, total disbelief. The movements had been too fast, yet too slow, too precise, too powerful for an old cleaner. It was as if a statue had suddenly sprung to life with the agility of a panther. Mr. Sterling stared, his jaw slack, his expensive glasses slipping down his nose. The police officers froze, their guns half raised, utterly baffled. Marcus Thorn, who had been witnessing the entire exchange from just a few feet away, looked as if he had seen a ghost. His face was drained of all color, his mouth hanging open. He, like everyone else, had dismissed Lee as an insignificant, frail, harmless old man. He had mocked him, patronized him, treated him with utter contempt. And now, this same Dusty had just neutralized a corporate criminal with the calm, terrifying precision of a seasoned operative, without even spilling a drop of water. The police quickly apprehended the sobbing, defeated Harrison. As they cuffed him and led him away, Lee simply straightened his overalls, a faint, almost shy smile returning to his lips. The cold intensity in his eyes receded, replaced by their usual quiet, patient depth. He looked around at the stunned faces, then back at the bewildered lead police officer. I simply saw him acting suspicious. "Officer," he said, his voice returning to its normal soft cadence. "And I reacted. He slipped." The explanation was clearly, laughably, magnificently insufficient, but in the immediate, euphoric aftermath of the crisis, no one pressed him further. The immediate danger was averted, and the company was saved from financial ruin. Lee, the cleaner, had saved Sterling and Sons in the days that followed. The story of the cleaner who saved Sterling and Sons spread like wildfire, albeit with a significant amount of embellishment and hushed, awed speculation. Whispers of a secret past, of unseen talents, of that move he made circulated. Mr. Sterling personally called Lee into his vast, opulent office. He offered Lee a hefty, life-changing reward check and a promotion to head of corporate security, along with a sincere, almost tearful apology for ever overlooking him. Lee accepted the check with a polite bow, but he politely and firmly declined the promotion. "My work is here, sir," he said, gesturing to the gleaming hallway outside the office, where his cleaning cart stood waiting. "I prefer to keep things clean." Mr. Sterling, baffled, tried to insist. "But Lee, Master Lee, you're wasted. Your talents." To be head of security, Lee explained softly, is to live in a world of confrontation. It is to watch and wait for the unbalanced. It is a defensive life. My job, as a cleaner, is restorative. I do not wait for chaos. I create order. It is a form of meditation. I am content. He did accept the reward, though, and he used it to quietly, anonymously fund a small community center in his old, struggling neighborhood. A place where children could learn discipline, respect, and how to find their center. A place where they could learn the philosophy of martial arts, the strength to be still, the power of awareness, and the ultimate wisdom of knowing how to win a fight by not having to be in it. Marcus Thorn, the once confident executive, was a changed man. The public humiliation, the stark, brutal realization of his own misjudgment, had been a bitter pill to swallow. It had shattered his ego. He stopped calling Lee Dusty. He stopped his condescending jokes. In fact, he started going out of his way to greet Lee respectfully. One morning, Lee was waiting for the service elevator with his heavy cart. Marcus, in a sharp suit, walked up, pressed the button, and when the door opened, he held it, his eyes downcast. "After you, Master Lee," he said, his voice quiet, humbled. The weight of that title, spoken by him, hung in the air. Lee continued his daily routine at Sterling and Sons, his movements still quiet, his presence still unassuming. But now, when he walked the halls, the executives no longer averted their gaze. They met his eyes, some with curiosity, some with respect, and many with a touch of newfound awe, and perhaps a little fear. They saw not just the cleaner, but the man who had seen through their meticulously constructed corporate facade, the man who had, with quiet dignity, revealed the truth and saved them all. They still didn't truly know his full story, and he liked it that way. He was content to be the quiet guardian, the silent observer, the Master Lee of the mops and the buckets, holding the memories of a different life close to his heart, a life that only occasionally, in moments of extreme necessity, allowed a glimpse of its legendary, terrifying truth. He was wiping down the marble counter in the lobby, his movements fluid, efficient, almost hypnotic. A young intern, new to the company, all nervous energy and ill-fitting ambition, approached him, a curious, friendly smile on his face. "Excuse me, Mr. Lee," the intern began. "I couldn't help but notice your hands. I saw you lift that giant bag of trash earlier. They're incredibly strong for an older man. What's your secret? You work out." Lee paused, a faint, genuine smile playing on his lips. He looked at his own calloused, veined hands, then back at the intern's bright, unjaded eyes. He winked a slow, ancient, knowing wink. "Good grip," he said, his voice a low, friendly rasp, flexing his fingers slightly. "And never, ever underestimate the power of a well-placed mop handle." The intern laughed, a bright, genuine sound, not understanding the full, profound depth of the humor, but sensing a deep, unshakable warmth in the old man's eyes. Lee then turned, his posture straightening for a fleeting moment, a ghost of the master he had been, and pushed his cleaning cart across the long, echoing marble floor, a whisper of a forgotten legend moving silently through the bustling halls of finance. Isn't it fascinating how often true strength and wisdom are found hidden in plain sight, dismissed by those too busy chasing superficial glory? What everyday person in your life might be harboring a remarkable, unseen talent? Thank you for joining us on this tale of wonder. If you enjoyed this journey into the unexpected, please hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories that challenge perceptions. See you next time.